Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Assembly Committee on Revenue. We will have the secretary take roll. Oh, wait. Is my microphone on now? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you better now. There you go.
Okay, so welcome to Assembly Committee on Revenue. We will have the secretary call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Present. Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine. Present. Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Assemblywoman Kazama. Here. Assemblyman Miller. Here. Assemblyman O'Neill. Here. Assemblyman Ortlicker. Here. Assemblyman Roberts. Assemblyman Yeager. Here. Chair Cohen. Vice Chair Benitez Thompson.
Here. Thank you so much. Welcome to everyone who's in the room, the large crowd we have here, and to those who are watching electronically and on the legislature's YouTube page. We are going to go ahead and jump right on into our first bill presentation, and we'll start off with Senate Bill 284. So let's open that hearing and welcome the bill sponsor to the table. Good afternoon, and proceed as you see fit.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. I'm so proud of myself always when I can get it to full screen and impress the tech folks who are sitting there making sure it can happen. My name is Julia Rowdy, and I represent Senate District 13, which is sort of the heart of Reno and Sparks. I have downtown Reno, downtown Sparks, the university, all the best places in the community. And I get to share that district with Assemblywoman Anderson, which is a great privilege. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about Senate Bill 284, which I would describe as a cleanup bill to implement some lessons learned from some legislation that we passed last session. As a reminder, in 2019, we passed Senate Bill 448, which created for the first time ever a state low-income housing tax credit with the purpose of increasing the supply of affordable housing in Nevada. I've only got 2 slides for you. My intention is not to put you through a educational process or a significant slide presentation. However, I did want to mention just where we are in terms of the availability of subsidized housing for folks who cannot compete in the affordable house or in the market rate housing market. So just to give you an example of who we're talking about, when we're talking about affordable housing, we are typically talking about a family or an individual not paying more than 30% of their income for their housing. What we know is if a person spends more than 30% of their income on their housing, then they have to start shorting other things. The first thing that goes is savings. If you are paying more than 30% of your housing, you're typically not setting aside any money for savings. The next thing to go is often healthcare. You'll see seniors on fixed incomes start to ration their medication. If you're a family, maybe you're no longer investing in your child's extracurricular activities. So that 30% is a nationally recognized standard of if you're going to have a good balanced family budget, don't be spending any more than 30% of your income on housing. So then what we end up with in our society is, and particularly in Nevada right now, rapidly increasing housing prices. Rental rates have gone up significantly. And a group of people whose income just isn't going to keep up. And so we're typically talking about senior citizens on a fixed income. I have a friend who worked his whole life, didn't necessarily work in high-wage jobs. His entire Social Security check that he lives on every month is $853 per month. So for that individual to find a housing unit that's going to be 30% of his income or less becomes particularly challenging. And that's not an individual who's going to go out and find a job that's going to earn him or her more income. They're generally sort of set. And I think we would probably all agree as a society, we want to make sure that that senior citizen has a place to live. It would be a very similar situation for a person on disability who is, again, living on that fixed income. Or in our world, we have families that are trying to live on minimum wage, and a minimum wage just doesn't compete in market rate housing at this point in time. So this is about the infrastructure that builds subsidized affordable housing so that folks who just are not going to compete for market rate housing have some options. That's the first thing. The vast majority of that housing in the state of Nevada, 95% of it, has been built using federal low-income housing tax credits. So this is a system that has been in place for years and years and years, and it works pretty well. It's not nearly enough, but it is not a system where the government goes in and builds housing. Honestly, we are not very good at building housing. That's not really our best skill or our role, but rather we partner with private developers. Some are for-profit, some are nonprofit, and we give them basically an incentive. And what we do is with that tax credit, we buy down the rate of the rent for that unit. So they'll typically sign a contract with us where they will say, we're going to take this tax credit, which they can sell to, and basically they can lower their taxes or they can sell it to somebody else. They'll take the revenue from that tax credit, and in exchange for getting that tax credit, they will commit to keep that rent affordable to a certain level of area median income in a community for 30 years. Generally how it works. So they buy down that rate. These deals are incredibly complex. It's a very niche group of developers that put these together. So in Southern Nevada, the one that you may be most familiar with is a wonderful nonprofit called Nevada Hand. And Nevada Hand builds a significant number of affordable units. And we're talking about subsidized affordable units. So again, the rent is going to be below market rate. And the way they build them is these programs. That's the basics that you have to understand. And for those of you who were here last session, I apologize for being repetitive, but I know we've got some new members and I want to make sure everybody understands kind of how tax credits work. So looking at this slide, there's lots of layers of funding. And I'm going to quote Steve Acroth, the director of the Division of Housing, who came up with a brilliant way to describe it. And we like to use lots of examples. It's a lasagna. It is a lasagna of funding streams. So when you're talking about putting together the pro forma for a subsidized affordable housing project, it typically will have all of these layers of funding. So on the bottom here, we have home funds. That's a particular federal funding source. Then we have the developer fee. So this is the money that the developer puts in. Then we have some of the tax credit equity. That's the program that I was just talking about. Then we have a bond program. And so they are layering in all of these layers of funding. And this is probably going to come as a huge surprise to some of you, but these federal dollars come with strings and strict rules and limitations. And so for each one of those funding sources, they're capped. And so you can see to the right where the red arrow goes. So the bottom one is limited by the amount of funds available. We really just don't get a lot of home funds. Those home funds are awarded by the local jurisdictions, and it's a very small amount. They're very, very valuable, though, because if your project has home funds in it, it qualifies for a property tax exemption. And that is typically very important to make the project pencil over the long run in terms of the operating costs of the project. The next is the amount that the developer puts in, and that's limited by operational cash flow, debt service, IRS rules for housing. There's a number there where it works. The tax credit equity is limited by the IRS rules, and the tax exempt bonds are limited by a debt coverage ratio. These are things that are immovable. So we can't do anything about it. So if the cost of land goes up, or the cost of labor goes up, or the cost of lumber goes up, and we happen to know that all three of those things have been happening for quite some time, it often leaves us with a gap. And so if you see that $3 million up there at the top, if this was the pro forma for an affordable housing project, using all of the funding sources available to this developer, what would be left as a whole is $3 million. And but for that $3 million, this project doesn't get built. So even though we've already leveraged adding up 1.5 million and 2.8 million and 12 million and 4.5 million in federal funds, primarily federal funds, and the developer's got to have some skin in the game. Project doesn't get built because we don't have that last $3 million. So that is the problem that the state low-income housing tax credit program seeks to solve. Again, quoting Director Steve Acroft from the Housing Division, who came up with all these wonderful analogies. It's like walking into a dollar store with 97 cents. What can you buy? You're going to walk out empty-handed. But if you can figure out that last 3 cents, the world is your oyster. So I will just admit right now that that is an oversimplification because these are incredibly complex projects, but that is all generally how affordable housing works. So last session, we did a big push, grateful to so many people who helped get this across the finish line. And for the first time ever, we established the state's low-income housing tax credit program. We did a pilot project for 4 years, and we set aside $40 million in tax credits. So that would be generally about 3 projects-ish per year that we would be able to build, and we would be able to, and here's the crazy part, if we did that, we would be able to increase the production of affordable housing subsidized units in our state with that amount of money by 60%. Because it's the small amount of money at the top of the lasagna that can increase production significantly. Because again, it's an all or nothing system, right? If you can't make it pencil, you don't build anything. So that's the first thing. Then it's the revenue committee, so I get to throw some math at you, right? So this just gives you a sense of the return on investment. So this is all of the projects that was built in a typical year. So for example, there were 6 one-bedroom units built at 50% AMI. So again, that means that those are units that are affordable to a person who has an income of 50% area median income or less. There were 369 that were built at 60% AMI, one-bedroom units, 3 that were built at 50% AMI, and 225 that were built at 60% AMI of 2-bedroom units. Of the total units built, the rent charge for those units is in that green column. So for a 1-bedroom, $657. Now again, that's not rock bottom cheap. There are people who need cheaper than that. And in some cases, we can layer this program with other programs to get them there, but still significantly better than market rate in most cases. If you do the math of what those market rate units would be, and this is, I will say, we didn't update this from 2 years ago, so this is data from 2 years ago. The return on investment is probably higher now because rent has gone up even more. But you get the point that in that year, from just those units, that's the level of subsidy that we're getting from that $40 million investment. So if you do all of that math, basically, for every $1 of state low-income housing tax credits, we generate $4 in rent subsidy over the life of that program. So the return on investment is really powerful. You spend that money once, that unit stays in play for 30 years, set at that AMI. Okay? So I'm a big fan of the program. Here we go. We're going to go out and build ourselves some affordable housing. We start down the road, and 2020 hits. And it's a pandemic, and there's a fiscal crisis. And so the Housing Authority did the appropriate thing, or the Housing Division did the appropriate thing, and they kind of tapped the brakes. There was one project underway, but the problem is with the kind of looking ahead, if we started pulling those tax credits, that comes off the bottom line of the state, knowing we're going into budget cuts, kind of tap the brakes. Let's take a minute here. And so only the one project got underway. So there's $3 million of tax credits that have been allocated. But the interesting thing that happened is these tax credits can be used. So now we're talking about the state tax credits. They're built just like the transferable tax credit model. And so basically, they can be used against either the excise tax on banks and payroll taxes, or the gaming license fees, or the tax on insurance premiums. So you have to have a taxpayer in Nevada who has at least $3 million of a tax liability. That taxpayer would buy that tax credit from the affordable housing developer. So the housing division issues that tax credit to the affordable housing developer. Then that developer goes out into the world and says, hey, casinos, hey, insurance companies, hey, banks, will you buy this from me, pay your taxes with it, but then I get the money so that I can then build this project. That's how tax credits work. And so they had to go out onto the market with their first tax credit program. Traditionally, our understanding is that most tax credits are picked up by gaming companies. Well, gaming companies were not in a particularly good spot to be spending time thinking about buying tax credits, right? If there's any industry that's been hit the hardest, it would be gaming companies. And so here you have this affordable housing developer wants to sell tax credits. Gaming companies not really working out. They go to banks. And the banks have an interest in affordable housing because they have CRA rules, Community Reinvestment Act rules, and are often significant partners in terms of the financing of building affordable housing to help their communities. So the banks, like, okay, let's try to get creative. But there wasn't any bank that had it was difficult to find a bank that had a $3 million tax bill that they needed to pay because A, they just don't pay that much, and B, it might be their subsidiaries who actually had that. So if you're XYZ National Bank, your headquarters, then you have this bank over here and that bank over here and that bank over here, and they're different entities and their taxes didn't necessarily add up unless you could transfer that tax credit down to a subsidiary. So we learned that the hard way. Like, there needs to be some transferability of these tax credits or it doesn't work as well. So that was the first problem we were trying to solve. The second piece that we were trying to solve, what we learned is that if you issue, the way that the law was written, because we were trying to be very cautious, is if you issue the tax credit on the back end, that's what we wanted to do. We want to be the last dollar in, make sure you've got everything taken care of, build the unit, get a certificate of occupancy, and then we'll give it to you. Well, in the investment world, money equals time, or time equals money, I guess is what I should say. These projects typically take 1.5 to 2 years to build out. So you give this developer a tax credit at the front end, or at the back end. They have to go out in the world and try to sell it before they can build it. And so now they're at a competitive disadvantage in the negotiations on selling the tax credit because the person that they're asking to buy the tax credit can't actually use it for some period of time, 1.5 or 2 years into the future. So we were actually unintentionally decreasing the value of our own tax credits. And there's no real good reason for us to do it because in this particular tax credit system, by the time a project gets its green light, if you will, all of the financing is in place. The likelihood of these projects going to the finish line is very, very, very high. And you'll hear from our housing specialists that very rare that these projects, once all the financing is put together, the land, they're very complex deals. They happen all the time. This is not a Tesla or an Apex. This is projects that we build year in and year out. They're pretty reliable. It's the same group of developers. It's not somebody coming from outside of the state, typically. So the certainty that it's going to get built, what we're losing in the ability to negotiate a good price on a tax credit by making it the very last thing in, we're not gaining anything in terms of ameliorating risk. So that was the second thing we learned and want to fix in this bill. And then the third thing, and then this is just naive sophomore error on my part when I was writing this bill. I thought I was being good and responsible and saying, let's try this for 4 years. I want a pilot program, give me $40 million in tax credits, $10 million-ish per year. And then at the end of that time, we'll evaluate it and see if we want to move forward again. So I put a sunset in, thinking that let's just do this for 4 years. What I didn't understand as a sophomore legislator was that by putting that sunset in, when that 4-year date hits, it gets wiped out of NRS. So all the work that we've done to create this program and all the learning that we've done, if you pass this bill, would just go away. So the third thing that the bill does is it removes the sunset. It does not ask for any more tax credits. It would be a future legislature's decision if they wanted to do more tax credits. But at least everything that we've learned in terms of building this program and putting it on the books would still be in our NNRS, and future legislatures would be able to make that decision without us just wiping the slate and starting over. So I've got a panel full of experts who know a whole lot more about this than I do. But generally, it's a good program. It's going to work. We hit a rough patch with the pandemic. We learned a few things on the first project that would help us to make it better. And we're asking for your support for cleanup on what is a particularly technical process of trying to build affordable housing in the state of Nevada. So I will end there, with the exception of, as always, I will ask Mr. Acroth, David Paul from Nevada Hand, Mr. Holliday with the Housing Division, if I said anything that was inaccurate, because occasionally I don't get it quite right. These are very complex. How are we doing? You can.
Good.
Steve Acroth with the Housing Division.
Good afternoon, Senator Ratty, Chair Cohen, Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. Once again, Senator Ratty, you have hit it out of the park as far as describing exactly what this does. I don't have a whole lot to add, other than, and I will defer to Michael if he is aware of. I am not aware of any projects that have failed, to go back to something that you alluded to earlier. Once they get to the point where they're financially closed, that deal is extraordinarily solid. And so I'll defer to Michael Holliday if he knows of any, but I am unaware.
Michael Holliday, Chief Financial Officer for the Nevada Housing Division, for the record. I am not aware. I looked through the division's records and I can't find a project that didn't make it, that made it through close, a financial close, and then failed after that. There were some foreclosures during the last economic downturn, but the projects were fairly well into their life when that happened. But we don't have anyone who got money from the division and never built the project and never had occupants.
And then I would just point out that David Paul from Nevada Hand is also with us, and he is one of the folks who's actually developing these projects, has had the experience with the first round of tax credits programs. And so, Mr. Paul, is there anything that you want to
add? David Paul, for the record, with Nevada Hand. Senator Reddy, I think you did an excellent job describing the program. Steve and Michael are, I believe they are correct. In my 10 years of developing affordable housing, there have been no projects that I'm aware of in the state of Nevada that have reached financial closing that haven't completed construction. I also serve as on the advisory council of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and I'm not aware of any projects in other states that have reached financial closing that have not completed construction. We put hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into pre-development for these things, and by the time they reach that closing, they're done deals and they're going to get built, and everybody's incentivized to do that. And beyond that, I think Senator Ratty did an excellent job. So bottom line, Julia Ratty, Senate District 13, for the record. Apparently, I am incredibly insecure and am forcing folks to tell me how wonderful I am in the middle of a hearing. So not my intention, but we'll just say that I'll just end with, for the 50% area median income folks, so this is a relatively low income. For that population, we have 18 units for every 100 that we need. So just 18%. That's the extremely low income. That's the 30% income. So that's like my friend who makes $853 a month on a fixed income. We have 18 units for every 100 that we need. If you get up to the 50% area median income, which is slightly higher but still not very much money, we only have 40 units for every 100 that we need, so about 40%. So there's a huge need, and I would ask for your support. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Senator Ratty. We know we got some people on the record there. It's good to see you all. So we'll go ahead and open it up to members for questions. And I see Assemblywoman Kasama.
I'm glad you can see me down here. So thank you, Chair, Assemblywoman Kasama, District 2. So on the last page, page 8, that would be section, it has to do with the 40 million. Section 2, you've added the clause in there, would cause the total amount of transferable tax credits approved for all fiscal years to exceed $40 million. So is that just, this is in here to remove any cap on that?
Senator Julia Reddy, thank you for the question. I actually think it's the opposite, and I'll kick it over to Steve Acroth to double check. But I think if you start at the beginning of that chapter, it disallows any amount that would take us over the total 40 million, because 40 million is the total that is authorized.
Authorized per year?
No, for the entire project.
For the entire project?
So last session, we approved $40 million in tax credits. They could be used, the intention was it would be about $10 million a year for 4 years. It did allow up to 13 million in a single year in case you were getting to December, there was a project that was ready, you could pull another project into that year, but no more than 13. And in total, over the entirety of the project, no more than 40.
So based on your wonderful presentation on what a great program, so what you're saying is that 40 million has been allocated, and once that is all used up, the program is over?
A future legislature would have to decide that they wanted to issue more tax credits. So I would hope that you all gain enthusiasm for this project, and as those are dried up, there would be a conversation again to see where we are as a state. But it does not have an ongoing source of funding. And I would say, and Mr. Gindin perhaps could confirm on this, but that's generally how we do tax credits in the state. There's not an ongoing revenue source or it doesn't become part of the base budget the way that actual appropriations do. Subsequent legislatures make decisions that they want to allocate more.
Mm-hmm. I see, because you extended the timeline, but then the funding has to be searched for on a regular basis.
That is correct. So I'm removing the sunset so that the NRS doesn't get swept off of the books, so the program will still exist. But the actual allocation of tax credits, a future legislature would have to do. And right now we're sitting with 37 million left to allocate, so we're going to be good for this biennium. And the next biennium, kind of depending on how the program goes, folks can look at it. Hopefully there's a champion. It would be either the next biennium or the following biennium that somebody would have to come back and say, this program's working really well.
Right.
Here's all the affordable housing we built. Please allocate more.
Yeah, it's a good program, and I agree that, the partnership with private and, incentivizing them to build them as efficiently as possible it's a good program. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, Assemblywoman Kasama. Other questions? Assemblyman Hafen?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And Senator, you have done a wonderful job presenting, and I really appreciate this. And I believe your intent is to try to expedite these projects because there is a demand now and a need now. My only concern is by removing the expiration of the 2030, it removes that urgency for the developer to, get it done within the next 9 years, or they would miss out on these transferable tax credits. Had you considered that idea, or could you try to address that to hopefully alleviate my concerns?
Thank you, Assemblyman and Madam Vice Chair. I think I just skipped right by the through you to
And I'm
your
highly
members.
offended by that. Please go directly to the members.
Great. Thank you. I apologize for offending the chair. So Assemblyman Hafen, great question. So the program as originally envisioned, again, was a 4-year pilot with $10 million per year. So I think we're staying in the spirit of that. There's kind of a natural cycle and a natural capacity for these projects, but I would let either Mr. Acroth or Mr. Holliday talk about that, about how many project applications they get a year. We tried to start with a dollar amount that A, wasn't too big of a burden on the general fund, and B, was very likely to actually happen. So I think we're trying to stay within the realm of what's possible. Of course, in the future, if we see that we can build more and build more quickly, we would always accept more. But Mr. Acroft or Mr. Holliday, do you want to talk a little bit about the cadence?
This is Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division. For the record, to the Assemblyman, we see in new construction projects anywhere from 2 to 4 come on board every year, and that's sort of where this was targeted originally. And what we're hoping for is to increase that, as was indicated on the slides, that these but $4 would actually increase that, as the senator indicated, by 60%. So I think what we're going to see, hopefully, is again increased production, particularly when this flexibility is added into the program. And then secondly, I think to your concern about potentially maybe these tax credits twisted in the wind a little bit, what our understanding is when they are going to be issued, if this bill comes to pass at closing, they will almost immediately be put against whatever tax the purchaser of the tax credit is going to apply them to. That's our understanding of historically how this has worked. Hopefully that answers your question. And Michael, I don't know if you have any additional commentary on that.
Michael Holliday, Chief Financial Officer for the Nevada Housing Division, for the record. The only thing I would add is that literally we have enough resources right now to fund that gap for 2 projects per year, and that's the extent of it. And we get calls all the time for more applications than that, and the state tax credit would actually then potentially, as Senator Ratty had mentioned previously, increase our production by 60%, meaning that we could do, instead of 2 projects a year, up to 5 if we could get 3 extra. And that was the contemplation for allowing up to $13 million, is that if we had a 6th project that came online in 1 year, we would be able to fund that and then just take it short the next year, basically, so that we could move the production, basically, to answer your question directly, move the production as fast as we could, as quickly as we could. We have capacity issues to some extent about the number of developers who do this. It is very specialized, but we did think that 5 projects a year could actually be accommodated.
Follow-up?
Thank you. No follow-up. Thank you very much.
All right. Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, and the group for bringing this. I think this is a great project. My question is, just to clarify in my mind, your example here is the $3 million of the 9%. But is it based on what some of y'all have said? So that amount can change. It's not always $3 million. It depends on the total cost of the project, or the cost of everything that would go into it. So is it the $10 million or $13 million a year kind of like a ballpark that could go up or down?
Thank you. Excellent question, Senator Ratty, for the record. Again, I'll kick that one over to probably Michael Holliday to answer.
Michael Holliday, Chief Financial Officer for the Housing Division, for the record. That's correct. It's not always $3 million. In fact, we have several projects depending on the size of the project, the cost of the project, to use Mr. Acroft's analogy, the other layers of lasagna that they've been able to secure. Sometimes jurisdictions may have more or less of those other funding sources. The lowest I've seen is 1.5 million. The highest, we always cap our current gap funding at $3 million, and that's why we use that as a ballpark, because we know that works. As costs increase, the number of units is probably the biggest factor that would change there, is what can we build for the same amount of funding that's available. But yeah, it can vary. We've seen between 1.5 and 3 million per project.
Thank you very much.
And Vice Chair, if I may, Julia Ratty, for the record, but you bring up a point that helps me to highlight one piece in the bill that I probably should have talked about, which is on page 6.
You missed something? Go ahead.
It's late on a Thursday. I'm going to go with that because I was not at the Cinco de Mayo celebration, just to be clear. So the page 6, section 7 is the the new, what I would call clawback provision. So at the end of the project, it has to be certified, all the costs have to be reported, and if our dollars ended up being more than what the project actually needed, there's a process to pull it back. Because, any project is going to be estimates of what it's going to actually be. And so I do think that that is an important safeguard for this funding source and making sure that we can use it to its best ability.
Okay, did I have any other members of questions? Okay, if not, I just had a couple, and so really glad to see this working, and obviously lots of conversation on the record. Last time was kind of the logistics and how this would work and how this plays out, because one thing I've learned is when you're talking about tax credits, it's tricky, right? It's tricky, and so it usually takes a couple cracks at it to make sure that you get your language in just the perfect spot. So some examples for the record, so we can just make sure that as we move forward, we've got legislative intent really laid out. So on the affiliate piece and the subsidiary piece, so you've got definitions in here, and I guess with the subsidiary piece, you've got that they own 50% of the outstanding equity interest. So is that a common definition? I guess, is that a definition that we pulled from somewhere else living in chapter, or did we come by that definition as through the experience of the past couple years of the program?
So Julia Reddy, for the record, I am going to see Mr. Acroth or even Mr. Ginden, because one of the first things I did was make sure that the housing division was talking with the LCB revenue team to sort out some of these things. So Mr. Acroth or Mr. Ginden, can either of you comment on where the definitions came from?
Steve Acroth, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division, for the record. To my knowledge, that came from LCB Legal in defining exactly how that was going to be used. I cannot speak with full clarity to exactly how that subsidiary and affiliate definition was established.
Okay, and I can circle back to legal. I just know that when we've had other conversations about either other credits or benefits that people might get, we've kind of begged the question of, okay, if they did sell it downstream, kind of paint a picture for us of who this is. And I think your example was specific to the financial institution piece. So if we went more to the other side of it, the gaming piece, I wasn't quite sure how that all played out, since most things are corp now, but I can have a legal comeback. But I think your intent is that they're pretty well invested in, and it would have to be a taxpayer in the state, because otherwise it's useless credit for them. Right. Correct?
Yeah, I would say, not trying to be too specific, but as Julia Ratty, for the record, as an example, if there was a casino chain with a name that rhymed with Patience, and they had multiple locations in a community, and each of those were individually organized but had the ownership structure that matched this definition, that is really what we're looking for. If there was a tax liability in 4 separate casinos, that it could be that the tax liability could be rolled up to get to the $3 million is the concept.
Okay, thank you for that. On the 40 million, and this was part of a conversation that we had, for the record, last year, but it makes sense to have it again. So kind of, we right now know that the housing division typically approves just a handful of projects, but we also know that tax credits can hit the sheets at any time, which is why I always get nervous about them. But in the same way that we never would have imagined hardly any of the tax credit being used, because in what world do people not immediately go cash in their tax credits? Now we have tax credits kind of laying around that haven't been turned in for the reasons of the pandemic that you talked about, the economic reasons. So I guess I would ask you or the division, how likely the scenario, or how probable would it be that you would see the opposite happen, where all 40 would be used or 20 would be used within the course of a year?
Yeah, I'll start. Senator Ratty, for the record, thank you for the question again. So I think in this case, it actually benefited us, right? I mean, oftentimes with a general fund appropriation for a program, like that program is going to roll along and it is very consistent. And if you're in the position of having to be in a special session and make cuts, it's very difficult. In this case, we didn't even have to talk about these tax credits during the special session in order to achieve the savings by just tapping the brakes. There wasn't projects underway. The division was able to tap the brakes. So in that case, we were able to kind of slow down when they would hit the sheets, and that really was a big benefit, to the tune of about $7 million, right, that didn't get used in that year because the brakes were tapped. Other than that, my understanding is the cadence of these programs is pretty consistent. It takes 1.5 to 2 years to get them from closing to hitting the ground. But now that the tax credit can be sold on the front end, I think you'll see a lot more predictability about when that tax credit is likely to be cashed in, because it'll be on the front end of the project, not waiting for that project to make it through the whole construction cycle, permitting cycle, like everything else that goes on along with that. But Mr. Holliday, do you have any additional comments about that?
And I think that's good. I think although it would be kind of permissible by law, I think it's highly improbable, but it's kind of always something that you have to plan for, because I think we've learned that that when these, when they, sometimes things happen that surprise us, right? So I just think I wanted to get on the record that it's highly unlikely, it's highly improbable, and there's the approval process and where they get the tax credits, and then now the true up on the back end as well. So there's a little bit of time there where you can make sure that you're not over, like if the approval was like, oh my goodness, we've got 8 of these things coming in, there would be some notification to us to say, guess what, we've got some good news, and then but it's going to be more of a hit in 1 year than we thought, right? There'd be time. I saw some general head nodding for the record. Yes, okay. All right, I think those are all of the questions that I had. So we'll just open it up I see that the chair has returned, and so I'm going to go ahead and open it up for testimony and support. We don't have anyone in the room. We'll go to, Senator Gocochea says he voted for it. Thank you, sir. We'll go ahead and go to the our presenters in Zoom, and I will hand this back over to Chair Cohen. I guess, is there anyone you'd like to go first? Not everyone all at once, though.
I think that's the presentation team. You can ask to see if there's anybody who wants to testify in support, but.
If we have no one in support on the Zoom line, then we'll go on to the phones.
Certainly, Vice Chair. Thank you. If you would like to testify in support of Senate Bill 284, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 074. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Charlie Shepard, S-H-E-P-A-R-D. I am the AARP Nevada State President. People of all ages need safe, decent, and affordable housing that will enable them to continue to live safely in their homes and communities as they get old. Nevada has a problem with availability and access to affordable housing. We must create opportunities to increase affordable housing, and this bill will do just that. Nevada families of all ages have suffered during this pandemic, and we need to provide housing costs that allow individuals and families to live in a neighborhood without sacrificing basic necessities such as food and health care. That is often the choice people must make when their housing costs are not affordable. The use of transferable tax credit is one means to incentivize construction or rehabilitation of low-income housing. The provisions of this bill will assist project sponsors in applying for utilizing these tax credits. This will expand the opportunity to provide affordable housing in Nevada. Older adults who are often on fixed income can become homeless if they are priced out of their housing. We must make sure parents and grandparents can stay in their community and live comfortably. AARP, on behalf of 345,000 members across the Silver State, support SB 284 and urge the committee to pass it to help ensure affordable housing is available in Nevada. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 184. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Matt Walker, Mattwalker, testifying in support on behalf of the Southern Nevada homebuilders. I think it's evident from the past two hearings that Senator Ratty and the other proponents of the bill have not only worked diligently over the interim to ensure that this program is extended, but they've significantly improved and strengthened the program. We think it's a wonderful bill, and we ask for the committee for its support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 899. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Christine Hess. That's CHRISTINEHESS, and I am the Executive Director for the Nevada Housing Coalition. The Nevada Housing Coalition is a statewide nonprofit whose mission is to advance and promote affordable housing for all Nevadans. Our members are in the North and South, urban and rural. Thank you, Senator Ratty, the Nevada Housing Division, and Nevada Hand for your leadership, and thank you, committee, for the opportunity to express our strong support of SB 284 today. We have an extreme affordable housing shortage here in Nevada, which long preceded the pandemic. We need more affordable housing, and SB 284 expands our state housing tax credit toolbox to provide flexibility for our development community and our state. We would also like to emphasize that affordable housing is one of the drivers for economic development in Nevada. Our own children struggle to stay or return home to raise their families and pursue their careers due to a lack of affordable housing. Hardworking Nevadans face housing insecurity that impacts their ability to maintain steady employment or consider advancing workforce skills. And our communities are hampered in attracting new businesses when those firms see the challenge in accessing affordable housing for their workers. The adjustments proposed in SB 284 are critical, and these tax credits will make a tangible difference for Nevada workers and residents in the form of increased affordable housing development. We must build our inventory, not our deficit of affordable units. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 663. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last digits, 663. You can press *6. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, committee. This is Shane Piccinini, SHANE PICCININI. I represent the Food Bank of Northern Nevada. We supported this work back in 2019, and I am grateful for the work that Senator Ratty is doing on this issue in this legislative session. I don't need to explain to anybody in this hearing how important that affordable housing is for people to be food secure, and I really appreciate you guys, the committee, and everyone who has done work on this issue. I appreciate all of the hard work that you've put into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
If you've recently joined us, we are currently taking testimony in support of Senate Bill 284. If you would like to testify in support of Senate Bill 284, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 938. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, committee, chair, and members. I am here speaking on behalf of Nevadans for the Common Good. My name is Pamela Hunter, Pamela Hunter. Prior to the pandemic, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition listed Nevada as one of 8 states with the least number of affordable housing units for low and extremely low-income individuals and families. Nevada had only 18 affordable housing units per 100 households, earning 30% or less of the median income. Households in this extremely low-income category include seniors, individuals with disability, and low-wage workers. Currently, many low-wage workers in Nevada are experiencing extreme hardship, unemployment, and risk of eviction, with few options for other housing if evicted. Households with an affordable home are more likely to be able to feed their families. A stable and affordable home is crucial for access to health care and many other services. SB 448, which became law in the 2019 legislative session, created Nevada's Affordable Housing Tax Credit Program. This was an important step in addressing the shortage of affordable housing units in Nevada. SB 284 makes important improvements to this program that will help preserve housing units as affordable or develop new ones. Nevadans for the Common Good thanks Senator Ratty for bringing both of these bills forward. Nevadans for the Common Good supported SB 448 in 2019 and supports SB 284 in this session. We urge you to pass SB 284. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 999. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. Bill Brewer, Brewer, representing the Nevada Rural Housing Authority. I want to thank the Chair Cohen and Vice Chair Benitez Thompson, the rest of the committee for this hearing today. Really express gratitude to Senator Ratty for bringing this bill forward. Of course, you're aware that Nevada needs additional affordable housing. Senator Ratty showed you a capital stack for a bond-financed typical housing program. In order to get these projects into production, a funding gap has to be filled to bring the other 91% of the funding to bear to build these projects. The state tax credit was a giant leap forward for Nevada, the first real investment by the state in affordable housing in decades. Unfortunately, the program needed a few tweaks to truly make it functional. SB 284 does that. At NRHA, we urge the committee and the legislature to pass this important legislation, and we thank you for your support.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 419. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, Vice Chair, and members of the Revenue Committee. My name is Benjamin Challinor, BenjaminChallinor, and I am the Policy Director for Faith in Action Nevada, a multi-faith organization that organizes and advocates for social, racial, and economic justice, as well as an inclusive democracy in both in Southern and Northern Nevada. And we are here in support for Senate Bill 284. We previously, as Action, were huge advocates for back in 2019 for this bill, for the system setting up, and we would like to thank Senator Ratty for her continued work for affordable housing in general, and specifically for the housing tax credit. Nevada is in severe need for additional affordable housing units. And according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, that number is over 80,000 units. These units are for those who are low-income, whose income are at or below the poverty level. And SB 284 will look to make sure that we are actually providing those units to those who are in most need. Thank you so much for your time, and urge your support.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 313. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Dawn Christensen, DAWNCHRISTENSEN, Vice President of Communications and Corporate Responsibility for the Nevada Resort Association. Good afternoon, Chair Cohen, Vice Chair, and committee members. This bill comes at a critical time when Southern Nevada's median home prices have reached an all-time high, demand for housing in Northern Nevada remains strong, and rental costs are rising, all of which continue to exacerbate the affordable housing shortage. So we very much appreciate Senator Ratty's leadership and work on this bill during a pivotal time for our state. As home and rental prices soar and inventory is low, affordable housing continues to be an important issue for the resort industry, our workforce, and Nevada families. This bill helps increase the affordable housing supply through the opportunities these credits provide for private industry to support the much-needed projects that will have an immeasurable impact for Nevadans looking for a place to call home. We support SB 284, and we ask you to as well. Thank you again to Senator Ratty for her passion and dedication, and thank you, Chair Cohen and members of the committee for your time.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Chair, you have no additional callers in support at this time.
Thank you. So with that, we will go to opposition. Do we have opposition in the room? Please come forward.
Marcos Lopez for the record, Americans for Prosperity, Nevada. I want to start off by saying that I agree with the sponsor's intent and we need to build more housing in general. Our primary objection is that we oppose tax credits in general, all tax credits. What tax credits are doing is they chip away our tax base, and in the long run, we're going to have to raise taxes, and calls for higher taxes will be raised. But secondly, this bill treats a symptom, not the cause. Housing is very much a supply and demand issue, and we need to build more, and we need to build more faster. Really, any type of housing through economic filtering, we do see that prices and rents do get depressed, and people are able to afford more housing. But the main cause of the increase of housing is land use and zoning requirements of local governments. So I encourage any member that comes back next session to bring some form of housing bill that addresses these issues and really preempts what local governments are doing, because these regulations that local governments have is really the key driver of the cost of housing and housing construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in opposition on the in the room, we will go to the phones.
Certainly, Chair. If you would like to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 284, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you'd like to testify in opposition of Senate Bill 284, please press star 9 now. Chair, you have no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And I don't believe we have anyone in opposition on the Zoom, but I'll just double check. So, okay. Seeing none, we will go to neutral. Seeing no neutral in the room, we will go to the phones, please.
If you would like to testify in a neutral position to Senate Bill 284, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers indicating neutral at this time.
Thank you. And I guess I need to also just double check on the Zoom. We have no one in neutral on the Zoom. Okay. Seeing none, Senator, would you like to make a closing statement?
Thank you. Julia Reddy for the record. Thank you for the generosity of your time. With that, I will just part by saying I also voted for Mr. Gocochia's or Senator Gocochia's bill.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will close the hearing on SB 84 and open the hearing on SB 395, which revises provisions governing the funding of capital projects by school districts in certain counties. And welcome, Senator Gocochia. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, my pleasure to be here this afternoon. I I promise you it'll be a little shorter, although when you see a bill of mine with only my name on it, you know it's going to be a tough bill. It's not your normal Republican conservative bill, I have to admit, but again, I better identify myself first. Senator Pete Goycochea, representing Senate District 19, which does include White Pine County. And I brought this bill forward for White Pine County. They are at the 364 statutory cap on their tax rate. And having attended school in White Pine County, the last time they did a major addition to one of their buildings I was in kindergarten. And now this is not talking to high school. This is the middle school where most of those students, the middle school and elementary grades, are in buildings that are well over 100 years old. I'm a taxpayer in White Pine County, although I'm not a voter in White Pine County. This bill will allow for a 25-cent override above the cap if it is voter approved. And their current tax base in White Pine County is a little over $400 million, with a couple $100 million depending on where net proceeds is. So they would have a tax base of about $600 million. If they went to the full 25-cent levy, they probably wouldn't be able to fund much of a bond even at that, even on a 20-year, 25-year bond. But I'm here to testify there is a true need in White Pine County. They need some schools. And I do have a number of people in White Pine County that are willing to testify and present their case to you this afternoon. All I can say is the bill in itself impacts 11 counties, could impact 11 counties because the population cap is 45,000. And those counties start at Nye, Humboldt, on down. I don't anticipate you'll see a lot of support for this because, again, people are concerned about their taxes and property tax. And again, the statutory cap of 364 is in place because that is the cap. This would allow them to go outside the cap and would also, in the bill, doesn't allow for the abatements to be applied either on this 25-cent cap. Just trying to quickly touch all the pieces in the bill that really are critical. And then I will turn it over to the CEO of White Pine County School District, Mr. Paul Johnson, and I believe the superintendent of schools is also on the line. They can fill you in a little more to the need. But again, the key points are 25-cent override outside the cap, voter approved, only those counties under 45,000. And again, it would require the school board, go to the Board of County Commissioners, place it on the ballot, and the voters approve it before it could move any farther. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Would you like to have your presenters go and then we'll do questions?
That would be fine.
Okay, and gentlemen on the Zoom, whichever order you prefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Chair Cohen, Vice Chair Benitez Thompson, and members of the committee. Thank you, Senator Goycochea, for your introduction of this bill. I'm Adam Young. I'm the superintendent of the White Pine County School District, and I'd like to make a few comments further introducing Senate Bill 395. I am a White Pine born and raised kid. I attended UNLV for both my bachelor's and master's degrees, and I'm proud to call Ely, Nevada my home. As the Assembly Committee on Revenue, you keenly understand the connections among industry, workforce, economic development, and world-class schools. As a superintendent and a lifelong resident of one of Nevada's rural counties, these are things that I understand too. I meet regularly with members of our local government and industry, as well as parents and students. And in White Pine, we have developed a district performance plan that aggressively pushes towards world-class learning, including opening a STEAM academy, operating innovative real-life preparation programs, creating college and career-ready specialists to stretch students towards their goals, and more. We are on our way, and the possibilities are truly exciting. But imagine trying to persuade families to relocate to Ely when, upon touring our 1909 elementary school, they learned that fire suppression systems, ventilation in the midst of a pandemic, no less, and campus security are limited due to the age of the facility and the cost of remodeling. Somehow, the innovation of a STEAM academy, which enrolls 1/3 of the school's students, has a little less luster after such a tour. Similarly, imagining emphasizing to employers our focus on equity and inclusive practices for children in our community when a tour of our 1913 middle school, which Senator Goycochea referenced, reveals that there is no ADA access for 2 of the 3 floors. And again, based on estimates from experts in the construction industry, the cost of remodeling is nearly equal to that of building a new facility. Equity in theory and concept only goes so far unless there's equity in practice. So this bill simply allows for smaller school districts, many of whom are already maxed out in bonding capacity, as has been referenced already under existing law, to go to the voters of their county and secure very modest funding that will help remove structural barriers which limit their progression and inhibit economic development. Here in White Pine, through the cooperation of our local governments, our parents, voters, students, and industry, the proposed changes would allow us to seek funding to move our schools and our students out of facilities constructed prior to World War I and into ones that match and support our vision of world-class learning. Again, the bill does not do anything alone to raise taxes. Rather, it puts the decision in the hands of local citizens. And if approved by our local voters, the funds raised would be one small part of our strategic plan to replace these schools, which, again, are more than a century old. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you for the time today. I don't have any further introduction of this bill, and so with your permission, Madam Chair, I'll toss it to our CFO, Paul Johnson.
Please go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this opportunity. Members of the committee, also thank you, Senator Goycochea, for bringing this bill forward. I have been the Chief Financial Officer for the White Pine County School District for about 25 years, and when I first started this job, we actually had voters approved in 1993 the construction of a new school, actually to replace the White Pine Middle School. And at that time, we did not have sufficient funds to secure the bonds that had been authorized to build the school. So they sunsetted and basically disappeared. And from that period of time, I have been trying to figure out how to replace this school. And Superintendent Young did a great job of explaining that they are pre-World War I facilities. From that time, we have looked at public-private partnerships. We have looked at grant opportunities, trying to secure federal sources. But we have not been able to secure an annual revenue stream sufficient enough to secure construction of a new school facility. And that time it was simply the White Pine Middle School that was going to be constructed. Over the time, we have conducted a facilities assessment. We had the firm of Lombard Conrad Architects come in and do a facility assessment. And they basically recommended replacement of the middle school and major renovations for the David E. Norman Elementary School. And at that time, the dollar amount was much smaller. But as the years progress, the difference between what we can afford and what school construction costs keeps getting bigger and bigger. So we're at a critical point, and we're really trying to find a solution. And this is one proposed solution. We're open to any solution that will help us remedy the school construction issue that we have. Currently, even if voters wanted to approve it, given the current tax structure, we couldn't even build the facilities. They don't even have the voice to do this. This bill actually would give voters a voice and provide some funding. To kind of give you an idea of some of the deficits in the facilities that we're looking at, and I'm just going to read this from the facility assessment. Superintendent Young said there's no fire and life safety suppression systems in those schools. We have limited and non-compliant ADA accessibility, poor indoor air quality, and inadequate systems for fresh airflow, inadequate and obsolete piecemeal air conditioning systems, inconsistent and unreliable cooling and heating systems, asbestos-containing materials in the floors, walls, plumbings, and ceilings. We have no outdoor parking and no playground facility at our White Pine Middle School. There is a bunch more on here. A lack of facility features designed to improve school security, student and faculty safety. Lack of facility features that enhance the learning environment for students and staff. And there are other lists on there. So this is something that we feel is something that has to be remedied in the best interest of our community and in the best interest of our students. Because inherent in these older facilities are obstacles that adversely affect our recruiting and retention of staff, adversely affect the student and staff performance in those facilities, and adversely affect economic development. One of the tough choices our community is going to have is a tough choice. Are they going to increase their property tax to be perhaps the biggest in the state of Nevada, and versus the quality of schools? Both of those have some economic measure of economic impact. So it's a tough choice for voters. It's almost a lesser of evils that you have an increased tax rate and improve your facilities, or do not have the increase in tax and put up with the less than sufficient facilities that we currently have. Anyway, that is a summary of our position and our, I guess, our attempt to solve the dilemma that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, is there anyone else who's part of the presentation?
I believe at this point, I think that's, I don't think there's anyone else, at least not that I'm aware of. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we will go to questions. I have a question from Assemblymember Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Cowan, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this forward. I have two questions. The first has to do, actually, I was looking at your the 2019 budget from the White Pine County School District's capital asset sheet on page 18. So I know that's not one of the pieces of evidence, but just did a little bit of research on it. In there, you mentioned that the district has more than $60 million in deferred construction. Can you expand upon that a little bit more, since that is from a year ago? Or can somebody from the district do so, as to what is the approximate amount that is truly deferred at this time? And then also, if there's been any discussion around some of the matching funds that are at the rural level. I realize that for the federal levels, when it comes to rural school districts, that's sometimes also a very difficult thing to be able to find. So if you could possibly expand upon both of those items.
If it's all right with you, Assemblywoman Anderson, I'll have the CFO of White Pine County respond to that, please.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Paul Johnson, Chief Financial Officer, White Pine County School District. Madam Chair, members of the committee. The deferred cost is a reasonable estimate, but it's not a certified estimate from an engineering firm or architecture firm. But to give you an idea of the deferred costs, the estimated cost that we have for the construction of a new K-8 facility that would be a facility to potentially replace the White Pine Middle School and the David E. Norman Elementary School. The estimate that we have from Core Construction, certified by Lombard Conrad Architects, is approximately $57 million. So the one school in and of itself is roughly the $60 million. The other improvements would be to the other schools that are around 1950 or 1960 vintage, that also need material improvements to their exterior facilities, playground and safety improvements, fire and life safety improvements, and things of that nature.
Thank you. A follow-up, or actually a separate question, Chair Cohen, if I may? Okay, thank you. The second question has more to do with the campaign or the ability to be able to do this itself. I realize it's not part of this bill. However, is there a plan as to how to get the community to be involved in the discussion around this, or is this simply based upon the fact that you're seeing a problem, you want to try to be able to start a discussion, to be able to have a campaign where the whole community will be involved in creating this discussion as to how to raise the money? Or is it automatically just going to be a ballot question of 25 cents? Does that make sense what I'm asking? I hope.
through the chair to Assemblywoman Anderson, I don't believe it. Clearly, it is an effort to get the community behind the need, even though they recognize the need, to at least pay for a portion of this construction. Again, when you start talking a $60 million school in a county of under 10,000, and you're talking a tax rate of up to 25 cents, it's not going to get far. And so the bottom line is, I think it's trying to bring the community together. I think it's a step that we can show the state and or other grants and applications that, hey, we're trying, we went to the override, we're trying to generate some money, and I guess near and dear to me is the fact that even though I went to school in White Pine County, none of my children or grandchildren did, but the bottom line, I recognize the need there. And anytime you're in facilities that are over 100 years old, when they were built, before you started school, and I've been out of school a long time, it's a struggle, and they clearly can't meet the needs. So I think it's more than anything. This bill was intended as an effort to generate some revenue, bring some bonding to the table, but again, recognizing, and in fact, there were some votes in the Senate that they told me the reason they voted against it because they felt the state had an obligation there more than what this bill was bringing. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Chair, for that time.
Thank you, and Senator, feel free to go and directly to the member, Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill. From some of what I've just heard and the need, that it seems like a very clear need, what I'm wondering is this, how many other ways for capital projects to build schools are there? Is it only a property tax or sales tax? Is there a limitation on how you can raise funds? Because I'm just curious why this is this suggestion.
With your permission, Madam Chair, maybe go to, again, CFO Johnson from White Pine County. They've been struggling with this for 30 years.
Please go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Paul Johnson, Chief Financial Officer for the White Pine County School District. I mean, that's a great question. It's one of the things that we have been struggling over, is trying to figure out what revenue source would be large enough to generate a sufficient, stable revenue to secure bonds for school construction. And in smaller communities, per capita revenue doesn't amount to a lot. So there are other fees on the books, franchise fees or residential construction taxes, which are per residential unit or per diem amount. But since there's so few people and such a small tax base, that there's small numbers, that any revenue generated from other sources of taxes don't amount to enough annual revenue to secure bonds. So the reason why property tax is being looked at is because that is the largest piece, and levying a property tax creates, I guess, the critical monetary mass that would secure a bond of sufficient size to help contribute to school construction.
Thank you.
Committee, do I have any other questions? Okay, let's go to Assemblyman Yeager and then Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Senator, I tend to agree with some of your Senate colleagues that I believe it's a state responsibility. And as you know, we've had difficulty getting to a 2/3 vote for revenue that would help all of the state's counties, including White Pine County. And unless I'm misunderstanding, or maybe I'm misinterpreting the presentation and the sentiment, but it sure seems like there's a bit of skepticism about whether voters in White Pine County would even approve this. So I guess I'm struggling with this notion of why would we pass this out and send it to the voters if it sure sounds like there's very little hope that the voters in White Pine County would actually agree to additional taxation. So I guess that's my question, or am I misreading the sentiment that this would be unlikely to get by the voters?
To Senator Goycochea, to Assemblyman Yeager, I'm not sure, and I would hate to call that, again, voters tend to be a little hesitant to raise their own taxes. But I think in a community like, again, White Pine County, in the city of Ely, I think the need has been there so long, I would hate to say, no, those voters wouldn't approve it. And, when you're in those kind of facilities, most of them, they went to school where their grandkids are not going to school, in the same facilities. And so I don't know how a person would vote on that. Yeah, it's a significant impact. And again, the other piece of it, I believe, if you bring the bill, bring the ballot question, and it is, say, a 10% or a 10-cent override rather than the maximum 25 cents, you might well bring some dollars to the table that would help negotiate some new construction and some bonding with some outside sources.
Gentlemen, do you have anything you want to add to the senator's response?
Yes, Madam Chair, for the record, Paul Johnson. And I guess maybe I'm being overly optimistic. When I take a look at the history of our voters and how they have supported school construction over the decades, I think there's a probable chance that they would take a look at this and agree to improve the school facilities. But it's not a slam dunk. I think it's a tough decision to make, especially given the period of time that we've just come through on the heels of a pandemic recession. To ask voters to increase their taxes may not be the best time. So we would have to give that some consideration. I think it's something that we are obligated to ask. We have a plan to secure the total amount of funding. We've actually submitted an application pursuant to NRS 387.3335, which provides that school districts under certain that provide proof of certain emergency conditions can make an application to the state for financial assistance. We've been in contact with the state treasurer's office. We've been in contact with Senator Gogichi and other representatives to try and figure out how we can get this quilt of funds put together in order for us to do this. So I don't know the answer to that. I do know that we have had a number of county commissioners come to us unsolicited in support of this. I've talked to the finance director for White Pine County, who is hopeful, just before this hearing, as a matter of fact, who is hopeful that we get this going as well. So there is some optimism, at least in the people that I've spoken with. So I remain hopeful that this is a potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Forgot myself for a moment. Thank you so much. Okay, so you might have answered a piece of it in a couple of the other questions that you have. So I guess what I was looking for is, and forgive me if it's under exhibits and I just didn't see it, but so the idea would be to, if the tax is passed and you get the extra 75 cents on every $100 assessed, then you don't want that to be you're probably going to have to build that up before you can use it, right? You're not going to be able to, or I guess is the intent to go ahead and bond on that the minute the voters pass on it. So they vote on it November 3rd or something. You're out there bonding on November 4th. I know there's a kind of a window in which local governments can do bonding. So I guess tell me a little bit about that process and how that would work.
Through the chair to Assemblywoman Thompson. Number one, it's only 25 cents is the max. And
sorry about that. I just gave you some great numbers.
We could definitely bond.
Do you need me to move a decimal?
But and anyway, I would assume, but I'll leave that. I'll let CFO Johnson respond to that. But I would think that with 1 year of collection or whatever, you could move ahead with at least with. And again, we're not going to be able to generate, even with the total, I don't think you can generate enough money to bond and build what's going to be required so it's just going to be a piece. I think mostly it's showing that, hey, we came to the table. We're willing to put our pound of flesh into this. Let's get some help.
I appreciate that. And so I imagine Mr. Johnson would answer that, but I'll ask the second part of it so you could probably answer the whole thing in one shebang. So this would be more like the tax passes. you start accruing money, right? So I guess then at what level of money would you need to collect in order to go out and bond against the project? And then it sounds like you're waiting for some private funding too. So like I could give an example in other situations where the state had this recently, right? We said we were going to give a chunk of money for one of our institutions to build a school, and one of our NSHE institutions to build a school, and we were part of the money, and then a private donor was the other part of the money. So we put our money out there, and then the private donor pulled back. So then our money was just floating out there, and then they had to wait to find a donor, and then we had to pull that back, and then they found another donor, and then we put it back, right? So I guess I'm saying, if you start collecting that money and the other pieces don't come together, you're still going to be collecting that tax for up to 20 years, right? There's nothing, once you start collecting the tax, you don't necessarily have a way to stop the collection, even if the whole thing doesn't, if it's not soup.
Madam Chair, yes, Paul Johnson for the record. It's interesting. That scenario the on again, off again scenario actually happened when we were trying to raise money for our athletic field to finish our high school complex. So I was worried I was going to lose my job because we had secured financing in one form, but not in another form. So our purpose with respect to this has a number of options. And all of it is somewhat contingent upon our ability to get all of the funding available to actually construct a school. So if the commission were to allow this to go to a vote of the people and we were actually able to collect revenue from this, upon passage, we would get approximately $1 million a year based on the tax base, excluding net proceeds of the minerals. Including net proceeds of minerals, it would be a bit more. But the reason why I exclude it is because in the future, we have no idea whether mining is going to remain here. And since I've been here, we've had 3 mining starts and stops. So if we focus on just $1 million a year, we would collect that. And if we were not successful in getting the entire amount to secure bonds, we would use whatever we could accumulate to do material improvements to the school facilities that we currently have and make them the best condition that we possibly can. One of those things, for example, was we have a structural issue of our White Pine Middle School gymnasium floor. The substructure beneath the floor is such that our engineers said that we cannot have large gatherings on this gymnasium floor for fear of catastrophic failure. That is one thing that we would move to improve and make sure that we could do if we were not successful getting the total amount for a new school. But a new school would be optimal. So along that period of time, as we're collecting the $1 million, if we get to a point where we secure funding for a new school, at that point, we would try to attempt to bond to secure the bigger piece all at once. So as Senator Govici indicated, it's kind of our local contribution and our skin in the game, so to speak, to help solve our own problem. So hopefully I've answered your question. If I haven't, please readdress that, and I'll try to do a better job.
Sorry, I appreciate the answer. I think I want to make sure I just got it right though. So if the tax prevails and you're collecting the dollars, but you can't get the other pieces to come together, then you've just got that fund that's being accrued, which can't be used for anything else, right? And so my answer was like, what are you going to do with the funds if you don't end up being able to bond on them? I guess, would you bring a bill back asking for a different use of those funds or authorizing different use of those funds? Or would you kind of just keep on accruing it till you got to the point where you could get it to let it grow so it could be your sole source of funding?
Thank you again, Paul Johnson, for the record. I guess it would depend on the circumstances. We have such a large deferred capital need that the money that we'd receive on an annual basis, if we were not to secure it for bonds, we would use it on a pay-as-you-go basis to do capital improvements to not only those two facilities that we just referenced, but the other facilities that we have in the school district. We have much greater capital demand than we have capital revenue. So we would want to continue to use that and put them to the best use to improve the facilities and upgrade them to meet ADA, life safety, fire suppression, and all that, those other needs. So along the way, if we were fortunate enough, either through federal stimulus or state support or donations, to secure the sufficient funds to build a school, at that point we would bond and use those funds to complete the quilt, so to speak. Also, we have a 25-cent debt rate for bonds that we have already issued a few years ago for school improvements. That would roll off in about, I think, 10 to 12 years. So when that happens, if that were not replaced, our tax would then go back down to $364.
Madam Chair, if I may, to follow up, I think a lot of this will be driven by the ballot question itself. And clearly, I feel if you go to the voters in White Pine County and that funding isn't committed for new school construction, and they do assume that, hey, we might raise these taxes 10, 15 cents per 100, and yet it's just going to roll into a capital improvement fund that can be used anywhere, even though it's needed, I think it would be a lot more difficult to get this measure passed. I think the language in the ballot question itself will drive that. I'm sure it's going to be for new school construction, and the voters would approve it for that. I think if you're talking about just rolling it into a fund and we're going to accumulate it for 20 to 30 years or use it, I think it'd make it very difficult to get the question passed.
And for the record, that was Senator Gogochia. Any follow-up?
No, I appreciate it, and I went through this process under Gogochia, as you know, and worked with the similar process in Washoe County. It's something that lots of counties have tackled, right, in lots of different ways, and lots of different iterations. So I get the need, and I get that it is really tricky, and I'm part of those committees writing the ballot question and arguing for the money, and it took a lot to get it done. And in another county they tried it. Ours was sales tax. The other county on the other side of the state tried it too with sales tax, and their voters said no. So you get mixed responses all over the place, and I get how it's a precarious proposition, but sometimes you just have to try your best and make your best argument and see where you land.
I thank you for that. Again, Senator Gogochia for the record, and really that's what this is about. This bill gives the people of White Pine County the opportunity to affect that change they need in their community, and if it doesn't pass, then we tried.
So I was wondering about the facilities that are there now. I understand they're extremely old, and so it sounds like, I believe you said that it would be to build new facilities, not just try to retrofit these facilities, which I'm guessing might be more expensive than just building new. But what's going to happen to these properties, and can funds from that be leveraged in some way?
I'd let Mr. Johnson or Superintendent Young respond to that, but I'm not too sure the high school probably is on the National Historic Register.
Well, but Senator Gogochia, your friend, former Assemblywoman Swank, would tell you that doesn't mean that the building can't be utilized. But please go ahead.
I can chime in on that. Adam Young, for the record, and thank you for that question. As has been alluded to a couple of times, that we have a plan, but that plan is fluid, and that plan is adaptable based on how things change as we go forward. So we have had a number of discussions about the two different properties that we're talking about, where White Pine Middle School is currently located, which is right in our downtown area. It is a very historic building. It's a place that people have a great affinity for. as well as the David E. Norman Elementary School, which is in a little bit more of a residential area. So we have contingencies for those, and some of those contingencies involve potentially sales of the lands and subdivision for additional housing and whatnot. But we haven't gotten too deeply into all of the details of those different plans because, again, we're in the very preliminary stages, and so much of what we are envisioning is dependent upon this bill that Senator Goycochea has sponsored for us. So the short answer to the question is yes, that is a possibility. The more in-depth answer is that, again, it all depends on what sources of funds do become available, whether or not this bill is passed, and what the will of our community is.
Okay, thank you. And then I just also wanted to ask about the fiscal from the county itself, from the Chief Deputy Finance Director claims a concern with an adverse effect on economic growth because of companies not being willing to move into the area if the tax rate is raised. Has there been any, do you have any idea how this would affect economic development? I know there was testimony about actually it's kind of hard to move people in or businesses in because of the schools being in the condition that they're in, but if you can add to that.
Senator Goycochea for the record, and yes, clearly I can understand, excuse me, the issue, but White Pine County is already over the cap by a couple of cents. They went through the severe economic hardship back 20 years ago, and the state actually took them over and ran them. So, they're accustomed to the chicken and feather scenario is what I call it. Got chicken today and feathers tomorrow. So it's boom and bust. It is mining there. Again, do I think that would impact the relocation to White Pine County if there was this additional piece on the tax rate? No, you have to have a reason to be there. And again, whether it's a mine or the community, or typically it would be a resource issue, or there are advantages to living in eastern Nevada in the rural communities. A lot of people, because of the land values, are coming out of Clark County and buying summer homes in White Pine County and building them. So I don't think if you're doing that, an additional 25 cents on the tax rate is going to make or break it.
Thank you. And then, gentlemen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Paul Johnson for the record. I agree with Senator Goycochea. There's a reason why people come to our area, and it typically isn't tied to how much property tax that they're paying. And the amount of money per residential dwelling unit for the 25 cents, I think, would be nominal in a total dollar amount if you spread that over 12 months. But it is a dilemma. I mean, we know that the taxes affect economic development, and we know that schools affect economic development. So the dilemma is a 25-cent increase in the property tax more of a detractor for economic development than the condition of our existing school facilities? I don't know the answer to that, but that's really the dilemma. All of us in education would say, that improved school facilities would probably be more of a attraction than the 25 cents would be of a detraction, if that makes any sense. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and seeing no other questions, I think we're ready to move on to support. Seeing no one in the room, I guess we will go to the phones, please. If you're ready, Senator. Good, thanks. Okay, let's go to the phone, please, in support.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of Senate Bill 395, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 577. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, this is Chris Bailey, DALY, Nevada State Education Association. We're in support of SB 395 as we represent educators in all 11 impacted counties by this bill, including White Pine. A couple of additional points. You've heard about the school facilities in White Pine, but more than half of the small rural school districts have capital needs and could benefit from this legislation. Obviously, there's a couple of school districts on this list that likely wouldn't need to access this with significant mining revenue. But rural school districts are also potentially looking at, a freeze in their overall budget support with the new funding plan. And although we would like to avoid that and adjust the hold harmless in that bill, regardless, I think districts are going to have to be creative. And then one final point is that while many Nevadans, including rural Nevadans, are hesitant about raising taxes, when you can assure the voter that the taxation is going to directly benefit their community schools and their kids' schools, they're much more likely to support that tax proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 202. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Paige Barnes, Paigebarnes. I'm with Crowley and Fraudo Public Affairs, today representing the Nevada Association of School Boards. We are here in support of SB 395. This bill provides the much-needed support and local authority to increase local revenue and support school construction throughout our rural communities. This is an important measure to support rural school districts and the students within them. We encourage your support for the bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Chair, you have no additional callers in support at this time.
Okay, with that, we will go to opposition. Seeing no one in the room and no one in the Zoom, we will go to the phones, please.
If you would like to testify in opposition of Senate Bill 395, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 617. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three, 617. You can press star 6 to unmute yourself.
My name is Juanita Cox, JUANITACOX. I am from Story County, one of the 17 counties. This body chooses winners and losers, which is unfortunate. Story County was one of the losers when you took and gave money to Tesla, and we did not get money for 10 years for our schools. I hope you consider this for the other, 11 counties, but only 10 of them would be possible losers. I'm in sympathy with White Pine School District. It's understandable that they're trying to do this, but they're implicating the rest of us. Elected Republican representatives have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and also follow the Nevada Republican platform. As chairwoman of the National Platform Committee for Nevada Republican Party for 2020, I'm reminding those officials of our No More Taxes platform. And this is also at the national level. This bill seems to believe that by allowing the sheeple to up their property taxes somehow lets them out of their obligation of no more taxes. Furthermore, how is this specified 11 rural counties to the equal protection under the law? Again, there are 17 counties. The property tax cap is supposed to be uniform. There is nothing uniform about changing or the changing of certain counties' tax cap and others no change. So I respectfully request that you vote against SB 395. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person in opposition, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 859. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is Janine Hansen, JANINE-HANSEN, State President of Nevada Families for Freedom. We oppose SB 395, which will allow 11 rural counties to raise their property taxes above the cap. Even though this allows for a vote of the people, we know how it works, that government combines using their resources to work to promote a vote in favor of raising taxes. According to the Institute for Policy Innovation in the United States, the total U.S. tax burden, including federal, state, and local taxes and hidden taxes, is equal to 56% of annual personal consumption spending. 56% is more than a person spends on housing, food, healthcare, transportation, education, and recreation. How can people possibly take care of themselves and our families when government takes 56% of our income and now wants more? There are many very excellent alternatives to spending more money on schools. Choice in education not only saves taxpayer money, but improves the academic achievement of students. Arizona introduced empowerment scholarship accounts in the 2011-12 school year, originally reserved for special needs children. The program has since been expanded for children in failing schools. The program is groundbreaking in its flexibility for how the account can be used. Money in the account awarded by the state can be used for tuition, textbooks, tutors, online classes, homeschool materials, and more. Analysis from the Goldwater Institute shows the state saves $12 million per year for every 5,000 students who utilize the Empowerment Scholarship account. I live in Elko County, which will not be affected by this tax, but I have noticed numerous businesses in Elko that have closed permanently during this last year of emergency shutdowns. How many more homeowners have lost their homes and their jobs or businesses and therefore are behind in their mortgages and will lose their homes because they can't even pay their property taxes? This is no time to raise taxes. Please do not further burden the people in the rural counties with property taxes above the cap.
We're at 2 minutes,
Vote
so if you
no
can please
on
wrap it up.
S395.
Thank you.
I just finished. Thank you very much.
Next person in opposition, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 987. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three, 987. You can press *6 to unmute yourself.
My name is Karen Waldman, Waldman. I oppose SB 395. I understand the downside of an outdated and crumbling school. What I don't understand is why this wasn't on your radar decades ago. If my house was built in 1914, I'd be remiss to kick the can down the road until it fell apart. I would have to set aside money each month to save for the inevitable upgrades it would need, such as a $20,000 new air conditioning unit, not wait until the unit failed and I couldn't afford to replace it. That's what people that aren't using other people's money do. I'm curious how many other funds that have come into these districts have been spent foolishly or wasted. I know at one time, Clark County School District had actually lost school buses. That's right, they lost them. They didn't know where they went. That doesn't inspire confidence to give more money for schools. I simply don't believe that there hasn't been any money over the years that could have been cut from the budget and set aside for this without coming now with your handout for taxes to be raised. I'm opposed to raising the property taxes on our home. When will you ever learn that the well of the public trough is not a bottomless pit for you to keep dipping into and taking because you can't manage the money you have? When my husband and I both
lost our jobs due to the extremely poor job the governor did with his harmful lockdowns and the control he exercised over all of us, we had to slash our budget and live on savings that we can't replace. Under the guise of only 25 cents per $100 of assessed valuation, that means an increase of $250 a year for our home, and that's not an expensive home. And we simply cannot afford to have any more tax increases. And yes, we know this would continue to go up every year because it's based on an assessed valuation that continually rises. This amount would be due starting with the August tax bills, and there simply isn't any way to make money appear out of thin air, especially with no jobs and the cost of living.
Ma'am, we're at 2
skyrocketing.
minutes, so please wrap up.
It's not our money, it's ours. We work for and save for. Stop robbing us blind and work with what you have, just like your citizens have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in opposition, please.
Chair, you have no additional callers indicating opposition at this time.
Okay, then we'll move on to neutral. Seeing no one in the room or on the Zoom, we will go to the phones, please.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to testify in a neutral position of Senate Bill 395, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers indicating neutral at this time.
Thank you. So with that, Senator, if you'd like to make any concluding remarks, and gentlemen, please go ahead as well if you'd like to make any concluding remarks.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm sorry, I never thought this would go anywhere close to an hour in length. My apologies. Again, the basics of the bill are up to a 25-cent override, only affects those counties under 45,000, which is 11 counties in the state. And again, voter approval. Just asking, please pass the bill, give the people of White Pine County a chance to make that decision, yes or no. Thank you.
Thank you. And gentlemen, please go ahead.
Madam Chair, I simply would just like to thank Senator Govichia and you and the committee for helping us try to find a solution to a problem that we're trying to solve. Thank you.
Thank you. And Superintendent Young, did you want to add anything?
Just again, thank you so much for the time. Thank you, Senator Goicoechea, and we appreciate any support that you can give us.
Thank you. And with that, I will bring the hearing on Assembly Bill 395 to a close. Committee, we were going to do a review of the Economic Forum, but given the hour and that we have many members who have to go to Ways and Means briefings and the like, we're going to roll that. So with that, we will go on to public comment. If we have, there's no one in the room, so if we can go to the phones, please.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers for public comment at this time.
Thank you. Anything from the committee? Okay, seeing none, we have handled all of our bills that have come over from the Senate so far, but I'm sure we'll be getting some more, so just we'll let you know when we schedule our next hearing. Thank you, BPS and staff, as always, and with that, the meeting is adjourned.